the program. Of course, this is Good Morning Kenya, the only way to kickstart your morning. Today it is Tuesday. Actually, today is the 13th of June, 2017. The reason I'm saying this is because the entire world, internationally, it's the day that there is going to be a lot of awareness on albinism. So it's the International Albinism Awareness Day. And this is something that started way back in 2013. Just to give you a background of that, when the United Nations General Assembly adopted resolutions that was denouncing attacks on people who live with albinism, and of course they were trying to come up with a way in which they can raise the level of awareness and clear some of the superstitious beliefs that have been associated around this issue of albinism. And they decided that starting from the year 2015, this day on 13th of June is going to be dedicated entirely to address the plight of people with albinism, just to get to raise the level of awareness. So today that is what we want to talk about. Plus we will just go broader and look at the rights of persons with disabilities, just to get to understand what are some of the things that we owe them as a society, and what can we be able to do to shape their lives and to make it easier. And of course also looking at disability as a social justice issue. So today, like you see on your screens, it's women at the forefront, and our topic of discussion is disability and social justice. And we want you to be a part of this conversation. I'm sure you are touched in one way or another. Disability, when you talk about it, it's not a gender issue, it's not an age issue, it's not a country issue. It's an issue that cuts across the rich, the poor, regardless of where you are, what level of life you are. It's an issue that touches all of us in one way or another. So we all have a role to play in having these conversations, in moving forward with the actions, in making the lives of persons with disabilities better. So I want to hear what you have to say concerning the conversation of the day. At Safin_Achieng is my Twitter handle, and the hashtag is GMKKBC. And probably you're wondering, am I going to be doing this alone? No, in studio with me this morning, I'm joined by two ladies who have done a lot of research in the area of persons with disabilities. And of course, just to introduce them, from my far left there, having all the way from Arizona State University, Professor Nina Berman, who has done a lot of research as well in so many areas. I was interacting with her earlier, and she's telling me she has even published a book on Germans on the Kenyan coast. But that is not the only thing she has done. She has done a lot of research, one of them including in the area of persons with disabilities. And of course, there is something that she's here in Kenya to do that she will tell us later on in the course of the program. And of course, joining me as well is Dr. Cecilia Kimani, the former Dean of School of Postgraduate Studies at Mount Kenya University, but currently a lecturer and has specialized in the area of special education, and of course trains teachers who go and deal with learners with disabilities. Thank you so much, ladies, for joining me this morning for this timely and really important conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So let's, begin from, what is happening today, the 13th of June, like I have said, when the whole world actually is marking the International Albinism Awareness Day. Probably because you've really, really taken to your heart the issue of persons with disabilities. Today, as the entire world will be coming out and focusing on this specific issue, what would be some of the things that you look forward to, or some of the things concerning albinism that you would want addressed on this specific day in the coming months? Let me start with you, Nina.
Well, the situation of persons with albinism in East Africa has been, very precarious often, right? I mean, there are people who have to, in Tanzania, for example, fear for their lives. So this is a day where hopefully people will, come together to think about why is there such a stigma, and how to include persons with albinism better, and be respectful and see them as people like everybody else, and have discussions in the different communities over this issue.
I'm interested in knowing why you've chosen to focus on East Africa, and it's a global marking of you know, this specific issue. So I'm trying to, you know, get your view in terms of how albinism is viewed in other areas as opposed to East Africa. What do you think? What's the difference?
I was just thinking of our local context here.
Yeah, okay.
But clearly it's something across the planet, and we see it also in the United States, but it has different repercussions.
But is the impact
it doesn't have the same repercussions, right, as it has in East Africa. That's why, and this is our context here. That's why I was thinking about it. But it's definitely another way of excluding people, right? So I mean, it's one of the markers of exclusion, and that's where we need to raise awareness to see the limitations of this kind of view of people.
In the States, things are better. The environment is friendlier compared to East Africa.
I mean, it does occur, and I mean, there's albinism also, you know, I mean, as you said, across the world. And I mean, people from all different groups have albinism, right? So this is not restricted to black people. And they have specific needs also. They have a light sensitivity, etc., etc. So we need to create situations everywhere that accommodate their specific needs, and you know, explain to people basically you know, the roots of, you know, the basic condition, but then you know, to really create the conditions that enable them to participate fully and are not excluded anywhere.
And coming to you, Dr. Cecilia, there is a lot of misconceptions that revolve around albinism and even just disability. You know, people believe, for a very long time, people believed it was some sort of, it had a divine cause, either a curse or a blessing. I read somewhere that there was a time that people used to believe that somebody living with disability was either cursed or was some sort of a god that had some sort of a blessing, and they could be given special treatment in the community. Do you think with the time that we've lived, with the level of awareness that has been there, with the activism that has been there, things are changing, or what do we need to do?
Yeah, I agree with you, Safin, that there has been that kind of a stigma where when a woman gives birth to a child who has disabilities, they seem to have been cursed, or maybe something they have done, like it's a punishment from God. But yes, there has been a lot of awareness, but still we still have to do much more. Because even as we say there's awareness, still underground, even amongst those some people who are educated, the problem is that there is denial. That's the biggest problem, that they may know that yes, there are schools and all this, but there is that denial that you do not really want to accept that you have a child who has a disability. But on the other hand also, I would like to say that in Kenya, the young parents who are giving birth to children with disabilities, most of them are now taking them to school, as opposed to in the past, when they would just keep them at home and maybe think that they cannot be educated, they cannot learn. But now we are seeing that they have this knowledge that they can learn and they can be assisted. So I think it's two-way, because there are still people who are educated who are still keeping their children at home, maybe because they feel it's a shame and therefore they do not want to expose them. But the biggest thing is about denial. What will people think if I let them know that there are such kids? But there are those who have really embraced their children, and you'll find them even going out with them even to public places, and that way even makes the children themselves get to accept themselves and not to feel like they're different. Yes.
And Nina, probably, you know, we like saying embrace people with disabilities. There's that gospel that keeps being preached all the time. But still she's talking about parents who live in denial. You know, until it happens to you, you can only talk about it and think it's easy. But then once it's happening to you, either a child or you've been involved in an accident and you've become disabled, then it becomes a totally different conversation. Probably, if you were to address that person who is watching us in terms of what they need to understand with disability, really, so that we demystify these misconceptions that we have. You've chosen to go into this line. You've chosen to do research in this line. Borrowing from your passion and your interest in it, what have you learned concerning disability that you would want the whole world to know as we mark, you know, the International Day of Awareness of Albinism?
Well, I think that, I mean, as we say, disability is a club that's open to everybody, right? And in fact, as people age, they become disabled in one way or another, right? So, I mean, that is something that everybody will experience limitations as they grow older, whether it's physical or, I mean, could be sight related, it could be hearing related, it could be, you know, that your bones are not working as well anymore. So that is something that will happen to anybody. And the other thing is that we all have in our families and among our friends, we have disabled people. My father had polio, so I grew up with a parent who had a disability. I didn't really see him as disabled for most of my life. So as I was growing up as a child, I did never see him as somebody with a limp and the legs were shorter. He was my father. And it was only later when I saw how other people saw him, when I realized how other people saw him, that he had a disability. And I understood that we were early in places because, you know, we always had to arrive early because he didn't want people to see that he was limping and he wanted to be on time. And only later I understood it was because of his disability. So, I mean, really people just need to open their eyes to realize that around them are people with disabilities. There could be hearing. Often people try to cover up hearing disabilities, right? They're a little bit hard of hearing and it excludes them from a lot of conversations. And if people were more sensitized to it, they would realize this and they could be, you know, more supportive. But there's so many different ways in which people are limited. And if we embrace that and understand it, I mean, we say sometimes like 10% of the population, but really if you look at aging, right, then it is much more. So it's part of our life, you know, for everybody.
Okay. So it's something that can happen anytime to anyone, regardless of where you're coming from or which age bracket you fall in. It is something that is just knocking at the door. So if you treat somebody with disability in a manner that you wouldn't want to be treated when you are in that condition, then you're just doing yourself injustice. Let's also, you know, on that note, look at how society has treated persons with disability. And this I'll direct to you, Dr. Cecilia. What is the society's obligation, first of all, to persons with disability, so that we can get to look at whether this obligation is being met?
The very first obligation should be to consider them as human beings. That they're just like any other person. It's just that maybe physically they're different. And so that will make people not have that attitude, negative attitude, because I would say that that attitudinal way of discriminating people with disabilities is the worst. Because the minute you start feeling like that, this person has a disability and may not be able to fit in here, and therefore we should not, like even during recruitment sometimes, someone may come in with a form of a disability, and then you hear people like asking, how are we going to be communicating to this person who is not able to hear? And nobody here maybe knows how to do sign language or to use sign language. Rather than think of how can we include this person within the organization or within the society, and maybe go an extra mile and learn how to sign, to use the language that they use, or maybe make the infrastructure friendly. We have this tendency of like saying they will not fit in. But with this understanding of inclusion, then we should always be open and find ways of including that person, rather than say we are not in a position to do it. Modify what you need to modify. Go an extra mile. Get someone who can interpret, or even have people who can learn how to sign, and embrace the person as they are. But one thing I like about Kenya, our constitution is very inclusive. It really talks about non-discrimination, that everybody should be participating and should be embraced, and it talks about equal opportunities so much if you go through our constitution. And I also like the way our government these days, with all the institutions, public institutions, are expected to show how they are really embracing the issue of disability. And I know this is happening even at the performance contracts. So that has really made people now know and understand that they need to go that extra mile, yeah, so that we do not exclude them in the society. But attitude first. Understand that they're human beings, they have to live with us, and then go that extra mile to include them, rather than say they cannot, and therefore we put them over there.
It's good that you've touched on the Constitution, because I actually wanted us to take advantage of this platform also to remind, you know, Kenyans that are watching us that in as much as, you know, there is that social obligation, that she has touched on so many things that are actually included in our Kenyan Constitution, Nina, and it's under the Bill of Rights, Article 54. Allow me just to remind Kenyans on what they need to do in embracing persons with disabilities. Actually, under Article 54, as a Kenyan, the persons with disabilities are entitled to be treated with dignity and respect, and not to be referred in a manner that is demeaning. You know, and then they also have a right to access educational institutions and facilities that are meant for persons with disabilities. Do we have enough of those? Again, that's another question you'll respond to. They're also entitled to reasonable access to all places, public transport, and information. They're also allowed to use sign language like Braille or other appropriate means of communication, and then also access to materials and devices that help them to overcome constraints arising from being somebody who is living with disability. So that is actually very well clear in the Constitution. That is what the whole society needs to be looking at in terms of how they can make their lives better for persons with disabilities. But let's go issue by issue. Let us start from the access to education, you know, in the Kenyan context, and then I'll get to you, Nina, also to share with us what, you know, you have. Do you think that we've really invested as a country, we've really taken time to invest and even find resources that are friendly to persons with disability and have enough teachers? Like now you're training teachers to help learners with special needs. Have we gotten to the level that we need to get to as a country?
I would say no. We have not yet really reached that level. And today I would say that most of the institutions are training teachers to be able to address learners with special needs, because most universities are having those departments. But, and also the teacher training colleges. Although at the level of the primary teacher training college, there isn't that serious focus on special needs. Yet, the policy talks about inclusive education. And inclusive education is about having learners with special needs learning together with those without, rather than put them in special schools and special units. But make sure that this learner is fully participating, and that the learner is not discriminated at all at any given time, that they are fully participating. So in that case, all teacher training colleges for primary schools then should be trained how to deal with those children, because they are expected to be in the regular schools. So the teachers that we are training at the university level will not be expected to teach at primary school level. They'll be teaching in secondary school. And the key thing is at the primary, because, and the nursery, because that is where you identify a child.
And most of them give up in education at that young level.
And if it is not identified early, we talk about early identification to facilitate early intervention. Because if that early identification is not done, then there is the delay. And in most cases, it's the teacher who identifies, and not the parents. The parents may see, but they may not really understand what it is all about. So right from early childhood training, teacher training, I believe that is where the biggest focus should be. And then at the primary school.
I'll come back to you to talk about parents, you know, and how they can be able to support this. But then coming to you, Dr. Nina, what do you think is the significance of having an educated population of persons with disabilities? How will this help in shaping their agenda in future or now?
You know, in general, I think people with very diverse backgrounds can, you know, educate each other, because they have so many different experiences, and people can learn from one another. So if you have a diverse classroom, then, you know, students are learning from one another. And, you know, I would fully agree with Cecilia that the, you know, primary education is a big issue, because you see still disabled people in persons with disabilities in primary schools, actually, but because they don't have the support structure, you don't find them in secondary education, and or even beyond that.
Yeah.
So there is the transition from one level to another is not there because the support was not there originally. And yeah, and we all benefit from having people with all these, I mean, different diverse backgrounds in our context, wherever it is. Yeah.
And it's good also that you borrow from East Africa, you borrow from the US. And when we are opening this conversation, you said, you know, the conditions are better for persons with disabilities in the US. There could be, you know, there are few challenges here, but if you compare the two, conditions are better on the other side. What do you think got you to that point? Lessons that you think, if we were to implement, then we would be headed in the right direction?
Well, you know, actually I'm from Germany. And if I compare Germany and the US, there are big differences. It is much harder still in Germany for persons with disability. And again, if I look back to the experience of my father, I mean, very little was wheelchair accessible, even in the last few years of his life when he was in a wheelchair. So, and there was still a lot of stigma that he experienced in his daily life. So I think compared to, I mean, Germany, you know, you see that the different countries also in the West have very different situations, also legally. The US probably had the most comprehensive Disabilities Act 25 years ago and was really at the forefront on all that. And you see that, you know, a lot of schools are integrated the way that you are thinking about it. At my university, you know, if somebody has, we have an office of diversity and inclusion is one office, but then there's also disability services at the university. So any student who has a disability, and it could also be a learning disability or a mental disability, if you're officially registered, then you're entitled to get the support, right? And that has created a situation where you have more people succeeding who would otherwise have been left out. Right?
Let me come back to you on the issue of parents.
Yes.
I've had a chance to go through, you know, the program of the conference that is coming up, that you are going to be talking about most of these issues, which of course we'll talk about in a while. And I saw one issue was how parents can play a role in supporting the education of learners with disability. That is one of the issues I believe that is going to be tackled. So tell me, how is that possible? Parents, you know, being part of the lives of learners with disabilities, how can they be able to do that, and what impact will that, you know, add in the education process of learners with disability?
Yes, thank you. As I had said earlier, if a parent is in denial, they will definitely not support their child because they have not accepted that the child has a disability. But it will start first with accepting that this child is different. This is not a child like the one I had or like the neighbors. And therefore, maybe first thing would be, once you accept, seek help. Maybe get to know this is the situation, maybe go to a hospital. But here in Kenya, we have the resource centers. But unfortunately, the resource centers are only referred to when a child goes to school. Parents may not know. So the first place they'll go to would be the hospital. And the hospital may be in a position to give them advice, whether it's therapy, whether it's about physiotherapy or speech therapy, all those kind of therapies. But the minute they'll accept, they will now seek assistance. Then when the child goes to school, and when they accept, they will understand that this child can also learn. Whether it's mental challenge or what, they still learn. Because learning is not about academic learning. There's a lot more than they can learn in school with the help of teachers who are trained and even in the presence of others who are like them. So once they accept that, they may even be able to join support groups where there are other parents who have children like them. And in those support groups,
that they don't feel like they are
the only one. Yes.
Yeah, they are lone rangers in this
exactly.
journey.
And you're able to accept and see, oh, after all, it's not just me. And maybe even find others who are, the child is not as bad as, you know, that their child is not as bad as the neighbors or the other person. And that way they keep encouraging one another and getting to know how well or where did you get this kind of assistance from the support groups. Then once they get to school, with the support of the parents, the child can even improve can do better, because if the child has to go home and do some little bit of homework, okay, I know the teachers who are trained are supposed to go an extra mile and maybe have a one-on-one period with the child, but with the situation in our country here, sometimes that is not possible. And I'm glad that we are changing our system, because our previous system, or the current, which we are now facing out, was so much focused on performance. And so a child who is seen not to be really not doing so well would be put aside. We want to focus
It's all
on
about
performance.
A's, getting
Yes,
good
A's
grades.
and mean grades. And in fact, I've even visited schools where I'm told that children were denied access to the school because they are seen to bring down the mean grade, those with a disability. With that focus of mean grade and academic performance, it was really
So
bad.
what's the
And
option?
I'm so happy. Yeah.
What's the option in the event that, you know, there's a learner with disability and probably the academic brilliance is a challenge? You know, what is the option? Because this person has to be somebody at the end of the day. They have to make it in life.
Yes.
So what are some of the options that even parents and teachers who work with learners with disabilities need to look at to bring up this person and make sure that they are useful in the society?
Now, one thing we need to accept here is that disabilities are so different and very diverse. There are those who can do well in academics. Like anybody who has a hearing impairment does not mean that cannot understand. They can process information once there is that intervention of communication, because for them it's about communication barrier. But if there's no communication barrier, they can excel just like any other child. For those with physical disabilities, with visual disabilities, it's the same. As long as there is that intervention, they can. But there are those ones who are mentally challenged. I think the ones that Nina is referring to as having learning disabilities. And this is about their brain, that their brain can only function at a certain level. And you cannot force that. Like you cannot force them to go up to maybe class 8 and do an exam. But up to that level where they can perform, there's much that they can do. There's still a lot they can do. Maybe some could be trained to do some skills. Even those with mental challenges, I'm told most of them are able to do beading work. You give them, you put the colors there and you tell them just bead. And that's something they can make a living from. So it doesn't really have to be like you must perform and pass an exam and get a job. But there are those skills that can make them be able to live even later on in life, and with the support of the parents. This is where, again, where parents are coming in.
I was also thinking simply of, you know, I mean, normal expectations of certain normativity, right? So you have an exam and everybody is supposed to do it in 30 minutes. Well, some people may just need 45 minutes, right? And so that would be also classified as a learning disability, where you just need a little bit more time to process. And doesn't mean the quality would be any less. So these are people who can perform at very high levels. They just need a little bit more time. Or people have an anxiety disorder where in certain situations that interferes and the performance is not there. But if the conditions are better, let's say they are, rather than having the exam with everybody else, they are in a separate room or something, then they can
and
do it perfectly well.
This needs a certain level of skill and sensitivity on the part of trainers of learners with disability. Because for you to be able to identify that, for you to be able to see that this learner may just be needing a little bit of a special treatment to perform, it needs you to go an extra mile to be more observant and to be more interactive, you know? Yeah, there's something you wanted to add.
In connection to what Nina has said, for me, I did a research on learners with hearing impairment. And in Kenya, they are known to perform very poorly when it comes to examinations. There was a time that there were only 3 secondary schools for learners with hearing impairment approved to what Nina just said, that they are not able to transit to the next level because they perform poorly at the primary level. And you know, remember, every sub-county has a hearing impairment school for learners with hearing impairment. So what I discovered, because I was looking at why are we not finding them in secondary schools, not even at tertiary level, tertiary institutions? Why? And yet I just said, it's not that they cannot perform because they have the mental capability. And I realized one major thing is that these children in Kenya, maybe it's different from in the US or in Germany, those who have hearing impairment, use sign language all through. Even if they have a little bit of hearing, they are tuned to use sign language. So they learn throughout using sign language. Yes, they have books that they are reading, But because their language is a signed language and not a worded language, there's a gap.
Yeah.
So they may not really understand what
The
they
words,
read,
yeah.
the words.
What they
because
understand is the sign.
Exactly, because they read a sign, one word they sign, another word they sign, another word. By the time they are completing the sentence, they are not able to put all that together because they looked at one word as a word separately. Because for them, when they sign, they can just sign one sign and they say something like 2 sentences in one sign or 2 signs.
Yeah.
So they learn that way, but yes, they have books to read, but teachers help them to learn. But when it comes to examinations, they learned using a language. But when it comes to exams, they don't give their output, what they have inputted. They do not put it out in sign language. They are expected to write.
Use words. Yeah.
And there's a big gap.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they may have put in something, they have the knowledge, but when you now tell them to write, and actually when their English is generally very poor, because theirs is one word, one word. So whoever is marking will consider that these people don't know anything. So for me, and even in my recommendations, I was like,
what do you propose?
Yes, that the exam is given in the same way that they learn in signing, and they also sign, and they are videotaped.
Okay.
They are video recorded, and that way you can see that they know something. But they have inputted all that, but they are not able to release or to show that what they have learned because they are doing it in a different language. And I tell people, it's like for me learning in English, and then I'm expected to write in German, for example, and I don't know any German. So I will not be able to express what I know.
But that does not mean that you don't know.
Yes, that does not mean that I don't know.
There is language barrier.
Yeah.
In the interest of time, there is so much we can talk about, but let's, briefly touch on the issue of the need to have that public life. Dr. Nina, you can take us through that. There's been that denial from the parents. They keep the people people living with disabilities a secret. Some don't want to come out in public.
Right.
Some suffer low self-esteem. Again, we have challenges like accessibility of the buildings in public places. When they go to socialize in social events, they cannot be able to access. Maybe the doors are too narrow for their wheelchairs. What is the importance of having, that public life? And what do we need to do as a society to ensure that every person with disability actually has the right to come into the public and live their lives, as every other person in the society?
Well, I think one important area that we haven't touched upon is labor and employment. And Kenya has very good laws around that. So employers get tax benefits if they employ persons with disabilities. So that is actually a fantastic way to integrate. And I think that if that was more widely known, then maybe more employers would look into this. And I think that would increase the visibility of people with various disabilities. So I think the whole area of the employment sector is really important. Accessibility issues, sometimes, I've been, made aware, for example, that if, let's say, public buildings have stone floors that are highly polished, that often is a sort of slippery surface that is very difficult for persons with physical disabilities to manage. So how can we create, in terms of our architecture and the building codes and all of that, environments that are inclusive to everybody? So we don't have to think even just about, persons with physical disabilities. Again, we can also think about older people or pregnant women, who also, or women with who have strollers, right? It's a similar situation. So there are many different reasons for why it would be good to create these more inclusive environments.
There was that attempt to create that kind of a conducive environment, by making it actually a law and a requirement that every public building that has staircases should have ramps for persons with disabilities. How's the uptake, from where you sit?
And it's not that it was there. It is still, I think, within the law.
Okay.
But I think one big problem we have in Kenya is that we don't follow up. Like, I know in the Western world, your building, even your own private building, has to be assessed, whether it has heating and all that. But for us here, it doesn't happen. And you are a witness, you have even seen building collapsing when we have laws.
Yeah.
So even such buildings, like for example in Kenya where we have flats, those flats need to be very, very friendly in a way that maybe it has a lift, or whoever is going to come in as a tenant, so that a person who has a disability will not say, I cannot go to this building, though I like this house, because it's not accessible. So all that needs to be done. And I think we only need to be more vigilant, because the laws are there, and we make sure that those people who are entitled to do that, or who have been given the task to follow up and to give approvals and all that, that are able to check and make sure that
And of
that
course, yeah.
happens.
Like
And you talked of public transport. That's another big
That is
problem.
even an
It
area
worries
that is
me
not accessible.
at all.
Very difficult.
And it can be made to be. Yeah. But again, you know, public transport, we have our laws. Recently we heard about the motorbike laws, but we still see them doing things what they feel like, how they feel like, and yet the laws are there. So ensuring that those laws are adhered to, I think that is where we are failing as a country, and it can be done.
And there needs to be, you know, a certain level of strictness
Exactly.
in making sure the laws are implemented. But first, make sure the laws are understood and people are aware of what is
That's
happening.
correct.
Sure.
So talking about awareness, tell us what you're doing from your end. You're visiting Kenya for the cause of raising awareness, you know, purposefully to help in raising awareness on issues to do with persons with disabilities. Talk to us
Yes.
about that.
Well, I mean, my sort of collaboration with Kenyan colleagues started in 2005. So just 1 year after the Persons with Disabilities Act was passed, when Professor Kimani Njogo and Professor Mbugua Wamungai from Kenyatta University approached me and others at Ohio State University for collaboration. And, you know, they came to give a talk, and then we started preparing a workshop, which was this first workshop that we did in 2007 in Nairobi. Was called the Nairobi Workshop on Disability, and it brought together scholars, activists, persons with disabilities, and also policymakers. It was actually at the time opened by Willy Mutunga, and we had, Isaac Mwaura was part of the conference. So we had quite a, you know, interesting conversations there, and the papers were published then in 2009. So this was sort of my involvement, but this was one of the initiatives that I'm familiar with, that where the idea was really to raise awareness and to, you know, have this conversation among these different constituencies that advocate and see what can be done.
Okay.
And so we thought actually that was the idea. Then it's 10 years later, let's have a 10 years later workshop and see
So it's
what
been
has happened
happening annually?
since. Well, not annually,
Okay.
but this is like, we had one in 2007, and now we're having another workshop this year.
Okay, a follow-up.
And the idea is really to see what has happened. So have we seen improvement in Kenya in the last 10 years? What are the areas? Where is, you know, where are the challenges? Where are the improvements? What has changed? So that is one of the issues. And we
So
again...
has anything changed? Anything that you've, you know, already assessed?
I do think there is a change in awareness in areas. There is, I think there are some more ramps.
Yes.
I think what we're lacking sort of studies that really track the changes sort of systematically. But you see that I think social media, for example, provide a lot of opportunities for persons with disabilities to connect, to support one another, and also to advocate. And we probably have some new networks that are, you know, NGOs or also community-based organizations. I mean, there has actually been quite a lot of funding that went to community-based organizations through the Uwezo Fund and the Youth Fund, right? So, for example, I've you know, studied one organization in Diani, the Diani Arts Youth Disabled Organization, and they received government funding, and that enabled them to start a CBO where they support one another. They created a lot of interesting mechanisms to really support one another.
Yeah.
So I
and
think
that makes them less dependent.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
because one issue has also been about making persons with disabilities so dependent on
Right.
other people
Yeah.
and
Right.
creating environments that make them more disabled, if I may use that term, because now they are at the mercy of other people. So if there can be such initiatives to make them financially stable, to make them educated, to give them employment
Labor,
opportunities,
exactly.
then they would just be people like any other person in the society and add value. And probably, what are some of the issues that you expect to see featured in this? It's 10 years down the line, you know, a follow-up conference. What are some of the key issues that, you know, we should expect seeing?
At the conference, we are expecting people to present papers, seminar papers based on a research that they've done. So I'm expecting to hear like the kind of changes that have come up as a result of the intervention, because I must say that a lot has happened, because I talked of the performance contract for any government institution where they're supposed to show how they have mainstreamed disability, and this is a requirement, I believe. So that will now even give more awareness, and even employers are now conscious. I know we have even been approached and we've been asked whether we can offer a short course on Kenyan Sign Language, because there are those organizations that feel like hospitals, for example. Public hospitals or even private hospitals, they need to have somebody who can do Kenyan Sign Language. You can imagine if someone comes in who is deaf, how is this person going to communicate of the illness that they have? And the minute there's communication breakdown, then it means treatment may not be correct.
And the Kenyan media, you know, has also done well in terms of embracing sign language, and that has opened the door for access of information for persons with disabilities, because they just used to watch news and they don't understand what's happening. So currently, at least, they can be able to be part of the process of what is happening. And speaking of that, I'm informed that our producer of our program, Abled Differently, Jackie Dubui, will be speaking at your conference.
Yes, that's correct.
Just representing the media.
And there's a panel on media that she's on.
That she's talking about that. So what are some of other topics that we should look forward to?
Well, as Cecilia said, you know, the law. So we have, we actually open up with a panel on the situation, the legal situation. So it's law and disability. And a panel on media is actually next. We also, or it's one of the panels. And then we have another panel on technology, because in some areas there are technological improvements that, for example, you can have these implants that enable hearing. But in the US, for example, there is resistance in the deaf community against the implants, because while it provides access to the hearing community, it also sort of destabilizes the support within the deaf community. So it's an identity issue too. Then we talk about stigma and addiction also. So I'm actually giving a paper on the question of whether addiction, especially heroin addiction, should be considered a disability. And yeah, so that's another issue, and education.
Yes. Which we talked about.
So these are the main issues.
Something to look forward to, of course. When and where is this going to be happening?
It's at the Methodist Guest House, and people are coming in tomorrow evening, and then our conference takes place all day on Thursday and Friday.
Wow. It's a noble cause, and of course, probably just out of curiosity, you've talked a lot about paperwork. You've talked about research. What do you plan on doing to push this to another level? Because most of the time, stakeholders come together, research is brought on the table, but then what's the practical part about all this? Dr. Cecilia.
Now that's a tough one, because I know research has been done and findings have
know
been
the
shared.
problems.
Yes, we know them.
The recommendations. So what's next?
It should be action. It really should be action. Like in terms of education, I would say I have not been part of the new curriculum that is coming up and the one that is being piloted now. But when I listen, I've noted that there's talk about special education. There's a lot of talk about special education, and I like the way the CS refers to always children with special needs, something that we haven't been hearing of before. But every time he's talking about, even last time when he was announcing results, he had a period where he talked about a student with special needs who performed very well, and even about the curriculum that has also been talked about. I haven't had the opportunity to see it, but I'm seeing action now, and where I just pray and hope that some of these findings that come as a result of research can be considered in, when we are coming up with policies and interventions. And we may, after we finish our research and we publish our papers, we will find a forum where we can share. Yeah, like for the media, with the media, for education, with the education people, technology, and all that, so that at least action is done, so that it's not just research over there, and that is not being acted.
But that's why the conference, I mean, conceptually, that's why we are bringing together scholars and people who work in NGOs and are activists. So we have the makeup of the conference participants and presenters balances this from the get-go. And so it's a collaboration between Twaweza Communications, which has this interest in advocacy, and Arizona State University, which, you know, where there's a research part, but we also have representatives from Mount Kenya University, from University of Nairobi, Kenyatta University, and then we have Ability Africa as, you know, one of the NGOs. We have the Child Network, right? Is that
it's going
Girl
to
Child
across,
Network, right?
It's
And
something
Teens
that's
Watch
going to
Center,
cut across.
Kupenda for the children. So we have various organizations in there.
I'm told we need to wind up and bring this conversation to a close. So your
Thank
final
you,
words,
having
words
us.
very quickly, and then we can be able to. Let me start with you, Dr. Nina. What do you tell my viewer this morning concerning what we've just talked about? What do you want them to remember?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for giving us this opportunity to talk about this very important issue. And I hope that people can open their eyes and their minds to realize that disability is broadly with us. It's in our families, our friends, and so we are all connected to persons with disabilities. And that we is actually has to be qualified, because that we is persons with disability. It includes it. So it is our larger social responsibility to become more aware of how to create conditions of inclusion and acceptance.
Dr. Cecilia?
I would also like to thank you. This is a great opportunity. But I would like to tell our viewers that it starts with each one of us, with a disability or without, how we view disability. Number one, let's accept it as something that's with us, as Nina has just said, and have a positive attitude. Because once we are negative towards people with disabilities, they'll feel their self-esteem goes down, they feel that they're not like the others. The attitude is very key, because once it's positive, the rest will follow in terms of accepting them in a society, giving them jobs, and appreciating that they can still contribute even to the economic growth of our country, in however small, in whatever way, but they can contribute. That we appreciate them and give them the opportunity.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much.
And all the best.
Thank you.
And thank you for watching. Of course, remember today being the 13th of June 2017, of course, the world is marking the International Albinism Awareness Day. There's a hashtag going around concerning that, and it's hashtag no ghosts. Yeah? I'm just thinking it's so disheartening that we could be talking about albinism and ghosts in the same sentence. I believe this was coined with the misconceptions that have come revolving around this whole issue of albinism, and what they're trying to do is just to raise the level of awareness and tell the world that people living with albinism are not ghosts, like many people would think. So that is the hashtag that is going round. And concerning disability in general, they always say disability is not inability. We are used to that, but it is very true. Disability is not inability. They are just able in a different way. Just try to find out what they can do different, if it's academic, if it's talent, whatever they can be able to do. That is what we need to do as a society to embrace persons living with disability. My name is Safina Chin. Don't go anywhere. There is so much that is coming up your way. The health item of the day is coming up with Samuel Joroge.